All right, well, there's an inevitable push and pull between reporters and spokespeople. Each side has something the other one needs, but their ultimate goals are very different. Now the relationship between the Biden White House and the people who cover it is getting a closer look and sparking allegations of impropriety. Adam has more.
During the Trump administration, White House press conferences were must-see TV, for better or worse.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
You are a rude, terrible person.
But with new press secretary Jen Psaki at the helm, the Biden pressers have been kind of boring.
Our view is that we must prepare to draw on information collected and analyzed by our intelligence community.
But maybe the drama is happening behind the scenes. Citing 3 sources with knowledge of the matter, the Daily Beast reports that Biden staff have already on occasion probed reporters to see what questions they plan on asking when called upon. Right-wing media seized on that as more proof of a dastardly double standard.
Imagine if the Trump White House asked for reporters to submit questions for Sarah Sanders or Kayleigh McEnany.
But actually, reporter-turned-spokesman Dave Guarino says the Daily Beast's scoop is a non-story.
The White House communication staff is doing their job in this instance. It's been that way for eons before the Biden administration, and it will be long after.
Because, he says, Flax and journalists both have an incentive to compare notes beforehand.
What the White House comm staff here was trying to do is get the information so that when she was at the podium answering the questions, she could answer the questions. And most reporters I've worked with, and when I was a reporter, that's fine, because really all you want is an answer to your question.
Of course, some spokespeople might want to steer clear of tough questions, but there's no indication that's happening here, which makes the Daily Beast's breathless exclusive even stranger.
Yeah, I mean, and let's face it, and Dan Lothian can also speak to this. I mean, when was the last time real news came out of a White House press briefing? And if there was a time, I can't remember what it was. I mean, a lot of these gaffes made news, certainly Sean Spicer and some of the ridiculous things that spokespeople were saying, but that's different from having the spokesperson make news. It ends up being, like a really important story for the day. It's very rare.
What drove me crazy about the Daily Beast story is you start reading it, and about halfway in, maybe 2/3 of the way in, they basically say, yeah, people have been doing this in one way, shape, or form for years, and it's not really any big deal. And they don't provide any examples of people who were not called on because they were going to ask something that Jen Psaki really didn't want to talk about. If that were happening, if that were documented, then yeah, I think it'd be appropriate to be upset about this. But in fact, the Daily Beast pointed out that Psaki in her early pressers has called on every single reporter in the briefing room. So what's the story? This is something that happens all the time, as I think every other panelist will say. A spokesperson wants to know where you're coming from so they're not blindsided. If you don't want to produce a electric back and forth, you want to be able to get some information out of them. My own preference is to not tell them exactly what I'm going to ask, because sometimes you want a little bit of a gotcha moment, coming at something from an angle they might not have thought of. But it's a relationship based on mutual trust, and I think it's appropriate to give a little bit, and on the spokespeople side to ask for a little bit of advance notice within reason.
Yeah, there's no story here. This is really looking for outrage, and can you imagine if Sarah Huckabee Sanders had done this? She did. She routinely asked them to provide not their exact questions, but the topics, the general idea, so that she could prep and bring that massive binder full of information to the briefing and actually be able to answer things. Of course, they're going to pivot away from certain questions. Of course, there are things they're not going to answer fully. They're not obligated to give you every single tiny, tiny detail. But basic prep work, saying, so what topics do you want me to cover? Let me make sure I can answer that. That is totally normal. And as Adam pointed out, she's called on every single reporter in the room. She hasn't she's sidestepped questions the way all PR reps sidestep questions, but she hasn't avoided calling on someone because she doesn't like what they're going to say. Mm-hmm. I think we're so used to 4 years of outrage and insults that now we're like, wait, this was a normal, boring press conference. We need to liven it up in some way, and that's what we're seeing in this story now.
Yeah, Emily, I think you hit on the key point here. If you're really expecting hardcore breaking news to come out of these briefings, then you're going to be in for a long wait. That's just not the way it works. And if you think about some of the best political reporters in the business, Maggie Haberman, Jonathan Swan, they don't show up at these things. All due respect to the people who do. They're hardworking journalists. Most of them do a good job. But also the notion that what if the Trump people tried to pull this? Are you kidding me? They're calling on sycophantic partisans who've been planted with credentials in there. So I would just say, Emily, you know I love you dearly, but this is 2 weeks in a row we've talked about one of these fake stories indicting the White House press corps. Could we give it a rest, maybe take a week off?
John, it was my idea. It was my idea.
That's okay. I take the blame for everything. The buck stops here.
If they were asking for specific questions, that's something I think would be wrong. I mean, that's my personal feeling. I don't think that any press secretary should be saying, tell me specifically what you're asking, or anyone else, before you ask that question. I do think it is completely normal to get a sense of what it is you're interested in for that day. And that happened all the time during the Obama administration. They would, when you were huddling prior to the briefing, they would say, so what are you guys interested in today? And you would say something like, well, the finance industry or whatever. It's general sense so that they know they have that information to present at the briefing. Now, it could go wrong for them if you didn't give them something and perhaps there was something you want to talk about with regards to, let's say, Russia, right? And that wasn't on their radar for the day. And then you go out there and you blindside them. What will they say? Well, we'll get back to you on that, right? So if you really want information on a particular story that may not even be driving the news cycle that day, you want to give them a broad sense of what it is that you want to address, but not the question. And then with regards to making news, there's no real news that happens at these things, but the news can happen depending on how they answer the question, the back and forth or something that goes wrong.